administrative records of Forsyth County, Georgia, situate the events of November 3rd, 2018 within a specific demographic and geographic framework. Located roughly 40 miles north of Atlanta, the county is characterized by affluent suburban developments intercut with rural stretches. On this particular date, the focus of the subsequent inquiry was a residence situated on Woodcliff Court in Cumming. The property, a large 2-story house with an elevated rear deck, would become the primary location of interest for investigators attempting to reconstruct the final hours of 40-year-old Tamla Horsford. According to the case file, Tamla Horsford was a mother of 5 and a recognizable figure in her community, known for her involvement in youth football programs. She had been invited to the residence for what was described in witness statements as a birthday sleepover for another parent, the homeowner Jean Mayers. The gathering was intended to be a social event for women whose children knew one another through sports. Digital correspondence recovered from Horsford's phone indicated her intent to attend the gathering, arriving in the evening with plans to stay overnight. Investigators noted that the demographic composition of the gathering would later become a point of scrutiny during the procedural review. The group consisted of at least 7 women, most of whom were Caucasian, while Horsford was the sole African-American attendee. While this detail was demographic in nature, it became relevant when analyzing the social dynamics and witness statements collected in the aftermath. The narrative established by initial interviews suggested a cordial atmosphere. Photographs time-stamped throughout the evening and later entered into evidence show the attendees drinking, watching a football game on television, and preparing food. The timeline of the evening, constructed through a combination of digital forensics and witness interviews, places the start of the gathering in the early evening hours. Horsford arrived at approximately 8:30 in the evening, bringing a breakfast casserole for the following morning. Receipts and physical evidence collected from the kitchen area documented the presence of various alcoholic beverages, including tequila and beer. Toxicology reports, which would be processed weeks later, indicated that alcohol consumption was a significant factor in the biological state of the individuals present. As the night progressed into the early hours of November 4th, the timeline relies on the statements of the other attendees. According to the statements provided to the Forsyth County Sheriff's Office, the group engaged in games and conversation until approximately 1 in the morning. At this point, the structure of the group began to fragment as individuals retired to various bedrooms within the residence. By approximately 1:30 in the morning, most of the attendees had gone to sleep. However, Tamla Horsford remained awake. Witness statements placed her in the living room and kitchen area And finally, on the rear deck of the home. The physical characteristics of this deck are critical to the procedural understanding of the incident. The structure was elevated, overlooking a backyard that sloped downward, creating a significant vertical drop from the railing to the ground below. The distance from the deck railing to the ground was measured at approximately 14 feet. The last verbal contact with Horsford, according to the homeowner's statement, occurred shortly before 2 in the morning. The homeowner reported seeing Horsford on the deck, smoking a cigarette. The homeowner stated that she offered Horsford a blanket due to the dropping temperatures, then went to bed, leaving Horsford alone on the balcony. This moment marks the cessation of direct witness observation from 2 in the morning until the discovery several hours later. There is a gap in the timeline where no direct human observation is recorded in the file. During this unobserved window, electronic data provides the only objective chronology. Digital forensics performed on the residence's security system indicate that a door sensor was triggered at 1:47 in the morning. 8 minutes later, at 1:57 in the morning, the sensor recorded the door closing. Following these log entries, the system recorded no further ingress or egress from the rear of the house. These timestamps became the primary focus of the timeline analysis, as they represented the final electronic signature associated with the deck area, while Horsford was presumed to be present. The environmental conditions of that night were recorded as clear, but cool, with temperatures necessitating the jacket Horsford was wearing. However, weather reports for Forsyth County indicate that it had rained intermittently during the night, and the ground was damp. The topography of the backyard was uneven, consisting of hard-packed earth and sparse landscaping. The timeline resumes at approximately 8:30 on the morning of November 4th. According to the incident report, the discovery was made not by one of the party guests, but by Madeline Lombardi, the aunt of the homeowner, who also resided at the property. The aunt reportedly looked out of a window facing the backyard and observed a figure lying motionless on the ground below the deck. The procedural response to this discovery is documented in the 911 call log. The call was placed at 8:59 in the morning, nearly 30 minutes after the initial observation by the aunt. This lapse was explained by witnesses as a period of confusion and shock, though it remains a noted anomaly in the chronology of the morning response. The caller was identified as Jose Barrera, who was in a relationship with the homeowner and was present at the residence. Investigators noted a significant procedural complication regarding Barrera. At the time of the call, he was employed as a pretrial services officer for the Forsyth County court system. In the audio recording of the emergency call, Barrera informed the dispatcher that a person was lying face down in the yard and was stiff to the touch. He stated he did not check for a pulse because he believed the individual was already gone. This observation regarding the rigidity of the individual suggests that rigor mortis had already set in, indicating that the cessation of life had occurred several hours prior to the discovery. When first responders arrived at the location on Woodcliff Court, they established a perimeter around the area where Horsford lay. The initial responding officer's report describes the position of the individual and the surrounding environment. Horsford was found lying face down, roughly parallel to the rear of the house. There were no obvious signs of a struggle in the immediate vicinity, such as overturned furniture on the deck or disturbed earth in the yard, according to the preliminary walkthrough. The medical examiner's representatives arrived to process the location. Standard procedure dictated the documentation of the scene through photography and grid measurements. On the balcony, investigators located an unlit cigarette and a lighter. A patio chair was positioned near the railing. The railing itself was measured at standard height, approximately 42 inches. There were no signs of structural failure on the deck. The wood was intact, and the railing was secure. The official theory developing at the scene, based on the proximity to the high deck and the lack of external signs of a confrontation, was that of a fall from height. However, the procedural handling of the location was later criticized in independent reviews. The area was not secured as a potential site of a criminal act, with the rigor typically applied to such investigations. The weather conditions and the foot traffic of first responders and witnesses were noted as potential contaminants to the integrity of the area. No extensive search for biological trace evidence on the deck railing or the clothing of the other guests was conducted immediately, as the initial assessment leaned heavily toward an accidental cause. Furthermore, the documentation regarding the chain of custody for evidence gathered at the scene shows gaps. The clothing worn by Horsford was collected, but the preservation of potential biological evidence on the clothing was complicated by the damp weather conditions and the delay in discovery. Additionally, records indicate that several individuals present at the party remained inside the home or near the location while deputies conducted their initial walkthrough. The separation of witnesses, a standard protocol to prevent the contamination of statements, was not rigorously enforced in the immediate aftermath. A significant procedural failure was documented regarding the chain of custody and information security involving Jose Barrera. An internal audit of the case management system later indicated that Barrera had accessed the incident report related to the death of Tamla Horsford. This access was unauthorized, as Barrera was a witness in the case and not an assigned investigator. While Barra claimed he accessed the report for personal clarity, the administration determined that his actions violated department policy regarding the integrity of sensitive information. Consequently, Barra was terminated from his position. The autopsy report, finalized weeks later by the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, listed the cause of the loss of life as multiple blunt force injuries. The toxicology section of the report highlighted a blood alcohol level of 0.238, along with traces of alprazolam and THC. The medical examiner concluded that the injuries were consistent with a fall from the deck. Specifically, the pathologist noted a laceration to the right ventricle of the heart, a transection of the liver, and a cervical spine fracture. Despite these findings, the report also documented injuries that some independent experts later found difficult to reconcile solely with a vertical fall. There were abrasions on the shins and wrists that raised questions about the trajectory of the descent. The autopsy report indicated that the injuries were predominantly on the right side of the body. Yet, the position in which she was discovered was face down. The lack of defensive wounds, such as fractures to the hands or forearms, typically seen when an individual attempts to break a fall, was also noted in the file. The official determination was that the coordination and judgment of the individual were impaired due to acute ethanol intoxication, leading to an accidental fall over the railing. However, the physical mechanics of such a fall remained a point of contention. The railing height required a center of gravity shift that is difficult to achieve inadvertently. Furthermore, the horizontal distance between the edge of the deck and the final resting place of the individual was not significant, suggesting a drop rather than a propelled leap. Yet, the specific rotation of the body required to sustain the documented injuries created a complex physics problem that the initial report did not fully resolve. In July of 2021, following a reopening of the case due to public interest, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation concluded a secondary review. The findings aligned with the original investigation. The state agency announced that there was insufficient evidence to prove that the death was the result of a criminal act. The outcome reaffirmed the accidental ruling, citing the high level of intoxication and the lack of physical evidence proving the involvement of another person. The prosecutor declined to pursue any charges, stating that the doctrine of evidence did not support a theory of criminal liability. The official file on Tamla Horsford remains closed, classified as an accidental death. However, the documentation of the case highlights the complexities of death investigations, where no direct witnesses are present. The timeline presents a gap of unobserved time between 2 in the morning and 8:30 in the morning, a period where the only witnesses were the silent digital logs of a security system and the biological markers left in the system of the deceased. The investigation relies heavily on the interpretation of these silent witnesses against the backdrop of a social gathering that ended in an unexplained loss of life. The disparity between the official accidental ruling and the procedural irregularities noted in the file ensures that the context of that night on Woodcliff Court remains under scrutiny.